We will straight away move forward to the next session, which is about the presentation of research papers. I would request Professor Dr. Sayyad Usman Al-Habshi to please come on stage as the session chair for the next session. Please put your hands together for Datuk Dr. Sayyad Usman Al-Habshi. Please welcome him. To present the paper on benchmarking Maqasid al-Sharia index and its performance in the sector OIC countries, I would invite Ala Alabad to please come on stage. It's Ala. All right. Stabilizing economic growth through risk-sharing macro instruments. I invite Sayyid On R. Rizvi to please come on stage. Ms. Iram Sabah, I would invite Ms. Iram Sabah to please come on stage to present her paper on Do Political Connections and Sharia Compliance Impact Profitability of Listed Firms, a case study of Malaysia. And Mr. Mughis Shaukat. I invite Mr. Mughis Shaukat to come on stage to present a paper on Islamic finance in the age of black swans and complexities of a multipolar world. So the stage is set for the presentation of the papers. Since we have an hour, so I think if we can have the presentations in about 12 minutes time, and we can have a 3 minutes question answer session. So over to you, Dr.
Okay, thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this session. It's by INCF. The whole group is from INCF anyway. First of all, as our brother said, you know, the time is so short, so I'll give only 12 minutes each. And if they extend beyond 12 minutes, then I will still stop them. So we first start with Allahabad. Sorry, Dr. Allahabad.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala ali baytihi tayyibin at-tahirin. Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be standing before you again, this time to present the results of our paper titled Benchmarking Maqasid al-Sharia Index and its Performance in Select OIC Countries. The paper attempts to address the challenge of transforming maqasid into measurable and quantifiable indicator. It does so by constructing a benchmark to monitor countries' compliance with maqasid in the aspects of economic, social, and policy development. So before discussing the benchmark itself and its construction, please allow me to consider first the current state of affairs around the world and in Muslim countries in particular. Widespread poverty, accumulation of debt, and the absence of morality, fairness, and justice suggests that the Western conception of development as material growth is not sufficient or comprehensive or sustainable. When it comes to Muslim countries, it is, of course, it's unfortunate to say, but Muslim countries have been lagging behind other countries in the world when it comes to economic and development indicators. These are some. For instance, we have literacy, political stability, and others. It is our belief that Islam provides a comprehensive and sustainable development model, and this could arguably be achieved through maqasid. However, there is a gap between Islam's vision and, as I mentioned just now, the current state of affairs in Muslim countries. 21 out of the world's least developed countries were unfortunately Muslim countries as of January 2014, even though some are well endowed with resources. So it can be argued that these conditions are due to the deviation from the Islamic vision for development. So turning to our Maqasid Index, since the time of Al-Juwayni, who is considered the father of Maqasid, there have been a number of conceptions put forward as being for Maqasid. So those were chosen on the basis of simplicity, imputability, and relevance with regards to the essence of Sharia. None of those scholars who have put forward different Maqasid conceptions ever claimed Hujjiyah, ever claimed independent judicial legitimacy for his conception. So that gives us flexibility of adopting a conception of Maqasid which is contemporary and which is relevant for empirical testing, and that is one put forward by Sheikh Dr. Taha Jabir Alwani. So Alwani's conception overcomes the lack of empirical content in preceding literature. What Dr. Taha Jabir Alwani did in 2001 was that he reduced the number of maqasid to 3 most essential and absolute minimum principles on the basis of inductive reasoning of the Quran. So the 3 maqasid he identified were as follows: Tawheed, self-purification, tazkiyah, and development, umran. For those in favor of the 5 classical maqasid, it's possible to integrate them within this conception, such that Tawheed could be seen as encompassing the protection of religion, self-purification as encompassing the protection of self and intellect, and then development as encompassing the protection of progeny and property. This is just to say that this benchmark index has the flexibility of adopting any conception of maqasid which is deemed reasonable by the user. So a total of 13 maqasid indicators that you can see on the screen has been identified and mapped to those 3 different maqasid. So we have compliance with Islamic axioms and socio-economic justice, for instance, as relating to Tawheed. Self-purification has been divided into spiritual and moral uplift, equitable distribution of income and wealth, and safety and security. The other 8 indicators relate to development. So I would just like to draw your attention, please, to the fact that development in this index has been overweight. We have 60% of the weight of the entire index given to development. The reason for this is twofold. Basically, number one, it's to overcome the subjectivity of the Tawheed and self-purification aspects or components of the index, and also to indirectly measure the essentially inseparable Tawheed component through development. So a total of 62 proxies were carefully selected in order to empirically examine these indicators, these 13 indicators. However, data availability issues have limited our calculation and investigation to only 27 proxies and 37 OIC member countries. So the index is calculated as the weighted average of the subcomponents of those proxies and indicators. So this slide shows the Maqasid Benchmark Index results. Each bar represents the Maqasid Benchmark Index score. The green bar, that full green bar, is an ideal Islamic state, a hypothetical ideal Islamic state, which has been introduced into the analysis to facilitate distance-based ranking and in order to measure each country's absolute distance from the ideal state. So as we can see, of course, performance varies. We have a minimum of 33 in case of Yemen and a maximum of 62 in the case of United Arab Emirates, and an average of 46 for OIC member countries in general. What this suggests is that there is indeed a gap between the current state of Muslim countries and the ideal state that would have been achieved had they prescribed to Islam prescription of development. Now, to guide reformatory initiatives, this slide shows maqasid indicators, distance to frontier. So those 13 indicators mentioned earlier, how they perform in comparison to the best frontier. So we can see again there is some differences. Some indicators have achieved relatively better performance in comparison to others. So what does this tell us? It tells us that there are aspects or indicators such as economic development and institutional quality that deserves policymakers' attention. Development in our countries could be improved with some further attention and policy initiatives directed to these indicators, for instance. However, this is to be interpreted with care, of course, because as I mentioned earlier, our proxies were limited and therefore the distance to frontier has to also be interpreted with care. For example, the environment indicator was only possible to be calculated using the CO2 emission, which of course could be interpreted in a negative and a positive way. So all of this has to be taken into account. Now, in conclusion, there is a considerable gap again in Muslim countries' performance today, and this could be attributed to the internalization of prescribed rules of Islam. The benchmark, the index, is intended to serve as a self-inspection tool for policymakers to monitor economic, social, and policy development within the scope of maqasid. Strengthening the worst performing indicators is, of course, important to promote maqasid consistent socio-economic development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Alabad. I don't want to waste time trying to summarize or anything. What she has done basically is just to use maqasid as a means of measuring the progress, particularly of development in Muslim countries, right? Thank you. So we go next to Dr. Said Aoun. Yeah?
All right. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Datuk. I'm actually surprised for a last session. This is probably the biggest crowd I've ever witnessed at a conference. My presentation was originally designed as an academic discourse, but considering we have a lot of industry people, the credit goes to IBA for that, and a lot of Islamic scholars. I'll skip some of the parts, and I'll just discuss on the idea and the arguments that we have. Now, before I start, the presentation and the whole idea of this paper stems primarily, and it is inspired primarily from the works of Prof. Abbas and Prof. Zamir on the risk-sharing ideology in Islamic finance. As a background, one of the things that we have always delved and discussed in private as well as in public discourses is that Islamic banking is growing at this rate, Takaful is growing at this rate, Islamic funds are growing at this rate. But one thing which very rarely we discuss is, fine, we might reach a stage when Islamic banking is, the whole country, 100% is Islamic banking. There's no conventional insurance in the country. There are no conventional funds. Would we still be exposed to the international interest rates? The question, this question, you can do at microstructure all 100% Islamic, but especially for OIC countries, the countries and economies would still be exposed to the interest rates because majority of the Muslim countries and actually majority of the emerging countries are heavily debt dependent. If you look at their government accounts, on an average 40 to 45%, their debt to GDP ratio is at 40 to 45%. A major chunk of it is dollar denominated. The international markets don't operate on Sharia principles. Those are all interest-bearing debts. Even the Pakistan's debt, I'm not sure it's gone over $50 billion in some recent numbers. Yes, there are a few sukuk issuances, but if you look at it, the major chunk, 90% of it is interest rate denominated debt. So even if we have 100% Islamic banking, our economies are still going to be exposed to the international interest rate markets. What's the possible solution? Prof. Abbas, in his yesterday's keynote address, had talked about some of his earlier calculations about how if we can remove the debt and finance the budgets through domestic financing. So this idea the idea for this particular study primarily stems from some of his writings on that area, that we need to work on instruments for which are not micro or which are not for purely financing, but they are designed for financing the governments. And this particular study is focusing on international markets or dollar-denominated requirements. Just a few stylized facts. We have figures of Islamic finance at 1.6 trillion, 1.8 trillion, depending on the sources we go with. There are 57 OIC member countries. 19 of those 57 OIC member countries are classified by IMF and World Bank as heavily indebted poor countries. If you look at the stats, which means their debt to GDP, and I'm talking about dollar-denominated debt, is over 80%, which is basically at an unsustainable level, and those economies are running on short-term injections by multilateral agencies and by IMF and World Bank on a daily basis. Now, in conventional finance, and over the years, a lot of studies has been done which talk about the evils of interest-based debt, and that is not in Islamic economics. It's been done in conventional economics. People have been talking about it, which Prof. Abbas highlighted yesterday as well, the evils of a debt-based economy. A major strand of literature talks about dollarization of liabilities. Now, if you look at the conventional economics, one of the basic arguments that is given is, and which Pakistan has tried as well a few times, is when your economy is in slowdown, you depreciate your exchange rate, your goods will become cheaper in the international markets, and you export your way out of a crisis. If your debt is in dollar denomination, this strategy may backfire as well, because when you depreciate your currency, your liabilities shoot up, because at the end of the day, you still have to pay back your debt in dollar denominations. So based on that, the idea came of designing an instrument which is entrenched in risk-sharing ideology and which is primarily for financing the government debt. GDP indexation or GDP linking is a phenomena or is an ideology which has been doing rounds since 1980s. People with economics background would be familiar with the name of Robert Shiller, who won the Nobel Prize in economics a few years ago. Even he has been talking about it for the past more than a decade. The whole idea is that a country's debt or a country's financing needs should be linked to their growth, which basically means that if you're growing fast in this year, you have to pay, your interest payment would be higher, and if you are in a recession, your interest payments will be lower. This gives some room to the governments to maneuver their fiscal policies in trying to revive the economy. Now, the problem is, when this idea was first floated, the first question that rose was that we're talking about GDP indexation or GDP linking, which basically ends up going back to the problem of interest rates. What we are proposing in this study primarily is musharaka-based papers. Why we are sticking with musharaka is because when you talk about risk sharing, equity or a musharaka is considered as one of the purest forms of risk sharing that is available. A musharaka is primarily a joint venture between two parties for a particular entity, for a particular project. So if the idea is, if a government issues an instrument or basically issues a claim that as the agent of the people, it says that the requirement is, let's say, $50, and they issue a paper and say that, listen, this $50 gives you entitlement onto the underlying asset or underlying business, which is the economy. If the economy grows by 5%, you pay by the return to the investor will be 5%. If it goes by 1%, the return to the investor is 1%. So effectively, the investor becomes a partner with the government in the economy of the country. What my paper focuses on is primarily testing it from an empirical perspective. I'm not a Sharia expert, so my focus is, before we bring it to the table, or before we present it to practitioners or the government, the first question is, the idea sounds excellent, but will it work? We have had discussions over the past two days. A lot of speakers have mentioned the need for empirical evidence, the need for a statistically sound evidence to show that how Islamic finance can benefit. So what we did was we took a sample of 75 developing economies, amongst which 40 are Islamic countries, which are OIC members, and the rest are non-Islamic countries. The reason for including the non-Islamic countries was to show or to basically test that this instrument, or the Islamic finances risk-sharing macro instrument, is not only for Muslims. It is applicable across the board. I will not delve into any of the econometrics or the methodology part, but I'll just go on two aspects. For any instrument to work, there are always two aspects. Is it viable for the investor? And is it viable for the issuer? There are always two parties to any financial transaction. Our results are pretty convincing at this earlier stage. So for a broader analysis, we did the analysis for the whole 75 countries as a group, because they're all developing countries. Then a question was raised that there are countries amongst developing which have the GDP per capita as low as $200, and there are countries which have GDP per capita as high as $18,000. Even if you look at it, we can't club them together. So we did, we basically divided our sample into 5 different groups, and we ran our whole analysis again. The findings from an issuer, from an investor perspective, are positive primarily for most of the developing countries minus the heavily indebted poor countries. That if there's an investor who, instead of giving giving a loan to the government, goes for investing in a musharaka paper with the economy as the underlying asset, how much or what will be his comparative return from the actual interest return that he received. This instrument is designed for a long term, for 10, 20 years. It's a long-term investment because economies are supposed to be long-term ventures. The results are very positive that if you're investing...
Time.
Ready? Okay, just 2 more minutes. 1.5, sir, thank you. So the results were that for an investor, over a period of 10 years, the return he gets, if he's investing in the country, is actually same or slightly higher than if he had given a loan. Plus, the return is, on a risk-return profile, it's much better. The other aspect is the issuer benefit. As a country, instead of floating a bond or borrowing from IMF or Paris Club, is it beneficial for me? As a government, your biggest concern is economic stability. So we look at it at 5-year intervals, and we find that over a 5-year span, if these instruments were issued 20 years ago, today the economies would be standing at the same stage, or basically with a 5% deviation. But the economic growth is relatively more stable. So the concept of economic stability, or basically the target of government's economic stability, comes in as well. So this is primarily what this paper is looking at. It can be further expanded, it can be further refined, and as well as more robustness checks need to be done, which basically can add on to this study. Thank you very much. Sorry for the time.
Okay, let me call next Birum. Yeah, please.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Before starting my presentation, I would like to ask a simple question. What do you think that Sharia-compliant firms should have political affiliations or no? Can you raise your hands if you say that Sharia-compliant firms should have political involvement or political influence? Can you raise your hands? Oh, nobody. How do you think about a firm which is not having any political influence? So you prefer a Sharia-compliant firm without having any political connections or political influence? Can you raise your hands? Majority of you, yes, you are right. So basically we have this idea in our mind that a Sharia-compliant firm should not have any political involvement. But this question leads to 2 important things. Did we check this empirically, number 1? And number 2, how Sharia view this point. If a Sharia compliant firm is having political connections or political benefits, then is it allowed from Sharia perspective? So the audience is wonderful because we have our very respectable Sharia scholars on the right side, and then we have academicians plus our industry experts on the left side. So my topic for today's presentation is basically, do political connections and Sharia compliance impact profitability of listed firms? A case study of Malaysia. Before moving forward, you might have this question in your mind, why Malaysia? We have chosen Malaysia. Reason behind is, Malaysia is one of the leader in Islamic finance industry, and everybody is aware of that. And now the second reason why we have chosen this topic is basically the political connections do have a role when we talk about business tycoons in Malaysia. So there are some researchers already have taken care of it. They have found that yes, there are impacts of political connections when we talk about business industry in Malaysia. Now I will move forward. So this is the topic of my today's research paper. We will go through the background, the literature review, and research objective, research question, data, result, policy implication, and conclusion. Background, as I shared earlier, that we have chosen this topic particularly because Malaysia is leader in Islamic finance, yes, and at the same time, the researchers like Gomez, Jomo, Fascio, they have found that politics play a very important role in the businesses in Malaysia. What is the motivation about this topic? We want to know actually, is it possible that a Sharia compliant firm is politically connected also? Or a Sharia compliant outperform the non-compliant firm, and at the same time, a politically connected firm perform better than the non-politically connected firm, or vice versa? How this study will contribute? Understanding of the impact of political connections, and then we have Sharia compliance, and then this is the first study in which you will see a listed firm, if the listed firm is politically connected and Sharia compliant at the same time, right? Okay. For any research paper, this is very important to mention that how you are going to measure your variables. So we are going to measure our two important variables, political connections and Sharia compliance, in the following manner. The first one is political connections, the percentage of direct government equity ownership. Number two criteria, the percentage of equity owned by institutional investors. And number third is basically the informal ties a firm have with powerful politicians. The first two are easy to take, but the third one is basically we have taken from the earlier studies of Professor Dr. Jomo and Gomez. They have done a very good job in order to identify the informal connections that are not proven through their annual reports, but they know the political connections. Why? Because who is brother to whom, and why they are working over there, the board of directors and all that. So we have taken all these three criteria. Sharia compliance, very simple. We have taken the criteria given by the Securities Commission of Malaysia. So according to their criteria, if a firm is Sharia compliant, we have taken that firm as Sharia compliant. We are not arguing with the Securities Commission. We follow whatever they are saying. Yes?
Just give the results.
Yes. So moving forward, I have set the stage. Now we just directly go to the results and the research question. The question is basically to analyze and compare the performance of listed politically connected firms and Sharia compliant firm. We have two research objectives here, two research questions. The first one is, do political connections contribute to good firm performance? And secondly, does Sharia compliance add to good firm performance or not? We have used simple pooled OLS. Profitability is measured by return on asset and return on equity. This is the equation for our paper. And then we have, this is the way how we have taken these variables. We have dummy variables, we have firm-specific variable, and at the same time, we have macroeconomic variable. We got 941 listed firms from Bursa Malaysia. Out of these 941 firms, 118 are politically connected firms, and 634 are Sharia compliant firms. And the period is basically starting from 2000 to 2014. The financial data taken from data stream and the macroeconomic variable from World Bank. So this is the summary statistic, but I will quickly move to the results. So there are three models actually. The first model is basically we just added dummy variables of Sharia compliance, political connections, and 3 firm-specific variables. So what did we find actually? We found that Sharia compliance is significant and have positive impact if a firm is Sharia compliant on the profitability. Secondly, we have political connections. So when we talk about the political connections, we can see that the variable is significant, but the performance of a politically connected firm will be slightly lower than the non-connected firm. So the question might come in the mind, why is that? Because apparently the literature shows that if a firm is politically connected, then the firm should perform better. Why? Because they get benefits of being attached with the politicians, they have the lax regulations, they get insider information, they get the government contracts, so on and so forth. But our result shows the other story, that now, starting from 2000 to 2014, the firms which are politically connected, they are not performing as according to the equal level of the non-politically connected firm, or much better than that. The second model, we have added the macroeconomic variable, and in the third model, we have added another dummy variable to see if a firm is Sharia compliant and politically connected, then how will be the performance? Theoretically speaking, we assume that the firm will perform much better, but the result shows that the Sharia compliant and politically connected dummy variable is not significant at all. So this is how we have 3 models, and we did the same thing not only for the research, ROA, but we did the same thing for ROE. So what did this result shows to us? Simply speaking, from our literature, from our empirical analysis, we found 2 things, rather 3 things. First one,
Time.
yes, Datuk, last. First one, if a firm is Sharia compliant, the profitability is better. Number 2, if a firm is politically connected, then the performance is lower as compared to the non-connected. Last but not least, we thought that a Sharia compliant and politically connected firm will outperform, but unfortunately or fortunately, the result shows that it's not the case. So what will happen with this result? The result shows that the government of Malaysia is doing very well when it comes to Sharia compliance, checking the status of the firms and ensuring the Sharia compliance over there. But we need to have a clarification. How about those firms that exist and showed the status of Sharia compliance, but in fact they are getting the political favors? Is it in line with Sharia or not? Last but not least, the role of government, 2 ways. First, we appreciate when it comes to Islamic finance, but when it comes to political connections, we need to revisit. And this study will give the awareness to all the investors who assume that a Sharia compliant firm should perform better, which is true, and sometimes they believe that if a firm is politically connected, they will perform better, which is not the case. Last but not least, how about Pakistan? Sorry, another last. For Pakistan, I just want to say one thing, that we can replicate the same thing for Pakistan. And we have to see the results. As in the case of Pakistan, it's the same, that the Sharia compliant firms outperform, and there is some political intervention, and if there is, what will be the Sharia stance on that? Does Sharia approve it or not? So empirically, plus from Sharia point of view, we can replicate the same study for Pakistan. Thank you very much.
It's very embarrassing for me because it's on Malaysia. But I know also that there are so many other countries having the same problem. So it's okay. All of us are embarrassed. There is a story, when all of us have died, some will go to heaven, some will go to hell. Then those people in heaven, they wanted to find out how are those in hell enjoying themselves. So Allah says, you know, you must build a bridge from heaven to hell. And the people in hell heard rumors that people in heaven are going to peep at them. They also wanted to peep at the people in heaven. So they approached God, and God said, you also must build a bridge from hell to heaven. INSEF was called upon to do the research. And they found out that the bridge from hell came up much faster than the bridge from heaven. So and they found out also that those people in hell, there are so many contractors with political connection. So I go to Mugis.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. After these 3 power-packed presentations and a joke to put the icing on the cake from our Dato, I'm sure you will find out that I am a million times less brighter than my 3 brothers and sisters who we have just heard. Honestly, I was thinking otherwise to participate in this event, mainly because of my schedules back in Oman, and then, you know, I have a 2-week-old baby who I had to welcome. Haven't given him time properly yet. And the other thing is that I have a special biasness to my beloved country. Events happening in Pakistan always are more attracted towards me, and they appeal to me. And then to meet my colleagues, my mentors, especially Professor Dr. Abbas Mirahor, who is not only a mentor, but he's much more than that. And he and I not only share the bond of respect, but it's a bond of love, what he and I actually call as Vilaya. So what you hear from me, whatever good or bad, it's, yani, hey, if it's bad, it's mine. If it's good, it's his. So let me now, you know, take a leap from Brother On's book, and I myself am amazed to have such massive audience in the back-end sessions of the event. But this is a chance for me to get an extra ajr, because I can help you catch your missing sleep naps, because I'm very good at making people sleep with my speeches. So be ready so that I can have some ajr. What I have is just one slide. I'm not as bright as the others are. This is an evidence. Mainly I'll be discussing about something that we now will be knowing as a multipolar global economic growth regime. Ideas that has been progressing and being brought up in the age of a financial system that is bombarded by black swan events, has become a fully complex system to the order of infinity. And we will look at that within this prospects of multipolar growth regime, where China, India, Brazil, Russia, Korea are now going to become the next center of focus to be the flag bearers of the global economic growth. How can Islamic finance fit in? Because this then rings a bell for Islamic finance and sounds and announces ideal times for Islamic finance. Now, any financial system that we know of, be it the current financial system, has to mainly perform 2 basic functions. Number 1, it has to give us legitimate and just avenues to generate income. And at the same time, much more importantly, it has to help us manage and mitigate the risks attached with earning that income. Presently, this discussion has become so much more crucial because the aspects of multipolar growth regime promises a lot of benefit for the whole world. The crux to reap those benefits would be an ideal financial architecture that enhances and assures that the benefits are reaped. The current financial system, ladies and gentlemen, as we know, and we have concluded already since years, 1400 years ago to be honest, more than that, that a system that is based on interest-bearing debt financing fails miserably to perform the basic roles. It not only disallows us
to allow to earn an extra income via legitimate and just means. But most importantly, it not only fails to mitigate the risks, it increases them. Financial risk. Financial crisis is a prime example. The risks become so high that the system, managing the system, understanding the system, and then sustaining the system becomes impossible. So much so that as more the risk increases, you shift from a natural risk phase to an unnatural risk creation, so that the total risks in the system becomes so high, i.e. becoming unmanageable. This it does by its two basic survival mechanisms that it needs to thrive on is risk transfer and risk shifting, and I don't want to comment more on that because you've heard what risk transfer and risk shifting is. But ladies and gentlemen, the theory of black swans say that as much the moment risks become uncontrollable and highly classified in terms of financial jargon, in terms of muamalat that we call it in fiqh, so is the ability to understand, predict, and control the system behavior. This is an ideal time where improbable events which have high global impact are ready to happen. And as a result, over the past few years, since the last 10 years honestly, the world has witnessed the occurrence of a number of black swan events. Now in the paper, inshallah, that you will have a copy, we have listed many, but the most recent has been the Britain exiting the Eurozone. We predicted that 3 or 4 years ago. They say they give it political angles, but underneath the carpet, it has financial pressures attached to it. Pakistan is in an ideal time. It's already in the next 7 to 11 countries. The finance minister was very kind to tell us that they plan to have Pakistan in the next 3 or 4 decades, which is too long, but I imagine the potential the country has, 2 decades would be quite sufficient, as the at least 18th best economy. So with multipolarity coming in picture, Pakistan in a prime zone, CPAC is in full bloom towards its completion. What best you need is a suitable financial architecture that can help you not only become a fine, important player in the global architecture of economics and finance, but to reap the desired benefit, pull them towards yourself of multipolarity. This it can do by adopting fully to the mechanics of Islamic finance, ways and means. The paper will tell you more details, and we have done a number of studies where we have empirically shown that how Islamic financial ways and means assures a more stable and a robust economic growth. Basically, the system interlinks or relinks the financial and the real sector, where the real sector then dictates the financial sector as a whole. There is no decoupling between the two. Since there is no interest rate, the driving factor then becomes the real rate of return from the real sector that is coming in. Our Prof. Abbas shared yesterday, that the equity premium minimum in this country, my beloved Pakistan, is 20%. We've done similar calculations from where I come now, Oman, it's 25%. Much more. Back of the envelope calculation I did. And we shared it with the central bank over there. We did a policy paper where we empirically proved that Oman can reap a lot of benefits given the oil crunch and the economic diversification officially adopted by the country over there. History has shown us that people who have resorted to the ways and means of Islamic finance, mainly Mudaraba Musharaka, which we now know as venture capital or Komenda from old age, has reaped a lot of benefits, so much so not only the economic growth has been more, but the societies have become anti-fragile. i.e., whenever there has been financial crisis, they have outperformed so many other entities. Silicon Valley is a prime example. Over Silicon Valley, when the rest of the world in 2008, 2009 was suffering from unemployment and devastating crisis, it was producing over 200,000 jobs. This is anti-fragility. You put more pressure, it outperforms. It performs better. Why? Because it resorts to only plain vanilla risk-sharing modes. Other examples, historical, are given in the paper, but let me give you one more example. Over the last 40 years, whatever technological advances that the world has made, and that have actually transformed the world as we know it now, it has become a global matrix. If we recall the famous movie Matrix, we are living in this world now. It's a matrix now. All the technological advances, I can argue with you that there have been classic risk-sharing modes of financing. all the smartphones that we very proudly carry and keep us connected with the world, they are a product of risk-sharing finance. Complete venture capital, musharaka mudaraba, plain vanilla. No fine-tuning even. This then creates a huge opportunity for countries like Pakistan, who are now reigniting its progress in Islamic finance with the regulatory as well as federal government support, which I was very happy to hear from the finance minister yesterday. Makes me most happy looking at from the outside world. What we have done over here is that we are trying to create a next phase for Oman itself. You see, the similarity between Oman and Pakistan is, it is a last mover advantage. Pakistan is reigniting. So more or less, the countries are at a relatively similar phase of development in Islamic banking and finance. In Oman, we have now entered a second phase of Islamic finance capacity building and practice, which we now call as branding Omani Islamic finance as new age Islamic banking. Total focus would be on al-bay'a, venture capital, SMEs, crowdfunding, angel investing, which are nothing but risk-sharing Islamic modes, honestly. And then something called as igniting the stuff, amalgamating with fintech. This developments, this digitization of the financial system, which yesterday's evening session was so vehemently arguing for, is the next big thing. This is why I call the world right now, we're living in a matrix, or matrix revolutionized. As a result, resorting to the risk-sharing for Islamic financial means can be a huge opportunity for countries like Pakistan, who are now next 7 countries, restarting its journey in Islamic finance with a huge pomp and new exuberance, as well as Oman, which is just opening up to the world. We are trying to make sure that Oman gets the direction right. Policy papers are being done. I'm sure people over here can do the same in Pakistan. They are a huge talent. And it is not, our fathers who are going to do that. It is up to me and my generation to take the burden and make sure we achieve the objectives in the right way. The move I refer to as not having knowers in Islamic finance. We want believers who has the potential to become visionaries in Islamic finance. Not many, few good men. And sitting on the right places, they'll serve the purpose. So as a result, what we are talking about here is that, just 30 seconds, you can count that we are just moving into an ideal, exciting times ahead. I call it exciting times. And countries that are last movers like Oman, who has done a lot of work, mashallah, alhamdulillah, it's only 10% market share. A lot of work is being done. I'm a part of it myself. And then countries who are reigniting Islamic finance, prime opportunity to take huge advantage of the benefits multipolarity is going to offer, combine it with new age Islamic banking, focus on fintech, venture capital, classic mudarab musharaka, and we have seen countries or people who have adopted have become anti-fragile. And this country, mashallah, is blessed, created in the name of Islam, as we have yesterday heard again, huge potential. Last estimate that I want to share with you, that by 2020 estimates are that the global workforce would be from Generation X. 50% of the global workforce would be Generation X, i.e. people who are born mid-80s onward. These are tech-savvy individuals, no joking. They are sharp people, not traditional, not dinosaurs. So to have them, and in GCC alone, there will be 100,000 Islamic finance jobs. Rest assured, most of them would be filled by youth. So if our youth does not know right now the philosophies, the theoretical underpinnings of classic 101 Islamic finance, we may end up failing to have believers and then converting them into visionaries. Multipolarity of the economic world is a huge opportunity to ensure that Islamic finance is adopted, practiced, and achieved with its objective in the best manner possible. I thank you very much. Pakistan Zindabad, the nation of Pakistan, Paindabad. Assalamu alaikum.
Congratulations. I wouldn't rate any one of them. They are all my students, and I love all of them. So with that, I just close the case, and we go forward to the next event. Please join me with a very big hand for all the 4 of them.